Hello from London, and welcome to our webinar, Operating Leases, the Hidden Costs and Pitfalls to Avoid, What to Do. Brought to you by Airlines Magazine, IATA, and IBA Aviation Unlocked. I'm Dee Dee Doak. I'm the head of content management for Airlines Magazine, and our guests today on this webinar are Chris Markou, head operational cost management for IATA, Peter Walter, director of asset management, IBA Group, and Guljar Lehri, head of aircraft transactions and technical marketing, IBA Group. Now, one reminder before we get started today, we will be taking questions from the audience at the end of our program today, but feel free during our webinar to send us your questions. We'll be looking forward to receiving them throughout the program, and our speakers will address them at the very end. But now we're going to start our presentations with Chris Markou from IATA. Chris.
Thank you very much, Didi. This is Chris from IATA in Montreal. So I'm going to provide you with, first of all, some of the overview of IATA. For those of you that may not know us, we are the association of the airlines worldwide. We represent about 290 airlines around the world, covering 82% of the total air traffic. And our mission is to represent, lead, and serve the industry. Some of you may be aware of IATA because of our IOSA audit that is it's mandatory for all our members, but a lot of other airlines are using that to improve their safety. Regulators are using that, and it's also a function for code sharing between airlines. Also, you may have heard IATA from the clearinghouse that we have that funds also our activities. And, of course, we provide training, consulting services, coding for airports, airlines, and so forth. And more information you can see there on our website. So moving on with, I wanted to give you an overview of how we operate our structure. We have our headquarters in Montreal, and the executive offices are in Geneva. These are the two largest offices. We have offices around the world in Beijing, in Singapore, Amman, Madrid, and Miami, covering all parts of the world. We have offices also in about 55 to 60 countries all around the world. We are divided into 5 major divisions and some other, of course, support functions. The first one, MER, deals with our members and various external relationships with governments. We also have the FDS, the Financial Distribution Services, where our clearinghouse rests. We provide services for airports, passengers, cargo, security. That's our APCS. The division I'm in is the safety and flight operations that deal with all types of safety and issues related to the operation of the aircraft, and also with ATM, infrastructure, air navigation. And finally, our commercial commercial hand is aviation solutions at the bottom. We have about 480 strategic partners. IBA is one, and we have about 100,000 or more accredited agents around the world in the IATA network. How we are governed? A lot of our members and strategic partners and others are interested in the way IATA is run. So we have a slide here that shows the external and the internal function for IATA. The annual general meeting takes place once a year. Next one is coming up at the end of June in Amsterdam. This is the meeting where all the 290 or so airline CEOs attend, participate, and in some cases they vote on issues about the industry. However, our daily activities are run through the Board of Governors, which is about 30 airline CEOs who are supported by our Director General that you see on the right, the CEO, who reports directly to the board. Below the board, we have 9 advisory councils. And these advisory councils are focusing in different parts of the industry. We have the Cargo Advisory Council, the Distribution that deals with GDSs and the NDC, the Industry Financial, where CFOs are members of that, the Sustainability and Environment Council, Advisory Council, that it's mostly for people who are dealing with environmental issues. Digital transformation is a new one. We are trying to harmonize in some of the areas as possible various activities within the industry. We have the Industry Affairs that deals with governments, our Legal Advisory Council, the Security Advisory Council dealing with cyber and physical security, and finally our Safety Flight and Ground Operations Advisory Council, which is the box that this work is under, and we have the Senior Vice President of this division. Below that, we have a number of industry groups, and I'm not going to go through the acronyms. If you are very interested, feel free to look them up in the IATA.org site. And these groups are run by people like myself, who are at the director, assistant director, manager, or head, or sometimes a senior vice president or vice president. So all these groups are industry groups joined by in some cases only airlines, but also other external IATA strategic partners participate. Moving on, I would like to show you what is our vision in what we call digital aircraft operations, DAO, and this is how this may help also in the leasing and the redelivery and some of the pains that we have in this part of the business of the industry. So what we would like to see, and this is what we have worked with a number of airlines and stakeholders, including regulators, OEMs, suppliers, standards providers. We would like to have the aircraft delivered in an electronic matter. And when we say electronic, we are talking not a PDF or an Excel, but a document in an XML or some other JSON or whatever language it is written, but that document is able to go seamlessly into the airline maintenance information system, because that's where the airline now, once they get the aircraft and they operate the aircraft, they maintain the aircraft, they service the aircraft, all this information needs to be in their system seamlessly, electronically. So someone may ask, okay, the world doesn't have, there are very, very few digital, let's say, deliveries done today. Airbus has done a few on A350, but the majority of the fleet is being delivered in a very conventional way through paper or PDFs or Excel sheets or other forms that they have to be inserted into the system. So what do we do with those? What we propose is that after the deadline, we try to, an aircraft that goes into a heavy maintenance event or a part that goes for an overhaul or repair, when it comes out of that MRO, then it gets its certificate and all the work package, that the record basically of the work done in an electronic format that can go directly into the airline system, and therefore we can achieve the digitalization in the industry and in the records. So that's a very simple way that we would like to present this. We would like to follow the footsteps of electronic ticketing that IATA introduced about 10 years plus ago, although it is by far more complex, involves more stakeholders. and definitely we're going to go through a long transition period, as many people, they are not going from a digital operation, but they have kind of a transition phase in where a lot of paperwork is becoming PDFs through scanning or some other means, JPEGs, which are really more difficult to search and categorize in our systems. So, but we have to live with this transition. So, moving on, as I mentioned earlier, we are working with a number of OEMs, to Boeing and Airbus mainly, to provide these electronic delivery documents in a way that can be inserted into the airline system. We are working also with engine manufacturers on this. And then, as I mentioned, this documentation has to go into the operating, the maintenance system, the information system of the operator of the airline, and in certain cases, the lessor as the owner of the asset, and there are about 40% of the aircraft that are leased today, so they may want to have also this access to records. And actually, this will facilitate and will remove some of the pains that the industry feels today with respect to records in the leasing process. So, of course, the airlines have to receive all these documents, and then they have to maintain the configuration, the airworthiness, the status, make sure that compliance is met, and so forth. However, we strongly believe that all these can be achieved significantly easier and with probably ensuring 100% compliance if everybody adopts a digital system. Of course, the MROs have to play a significant role into this process because they are going to create these documents that will be passed on to the airlines and then to a lessor for a transition where is needed that these records need to be moved on to the next operator. So moving on to the next slide, you can see there that we have created what we call the Aircraft Leasing Technical Group. Some of you may have heard it of as Aircraft Leasing Advisory Group, that was called ALAG in the past. And the main reason for having this group is to provide really an open forum for the industry stakeholders. Of course, the airlines and the lessors are the big participants into this one. However, there are other entities. IBA is one, CFM is another one, that they trade materials. They are very interested into participating into these activities. A lot of this work is posted on our website. If you would like to learn more about it, please visit our website that is listed on the slide. So, what is happening in the airline business? There is apparently marketing sees that there is a demand for additional capacity. An aircraft or more is needed. If you are changing fleets or network, you may identify that there is a need for aircraft. You do not, in certain cases, and for a number of reasons, you elect to go with a leased aircraft versus an aircraft that you can own. So if you lease an aircraft, first of all, you need to see the demand. You need to check for the aircraft that are available and have choices. However, in cases that the aircraft is used, is a second-hand, let's say, aircraft, you will receive that aircraft with something that is called in the contract as where is as is. So that means that you receive the aircraft in the condition that it is, and you have to have a very strong technical department or external services that they're going to check the aircraft from a regulatory perspective to meet your own regulatory authority airworthiness requirements. In some parts of the world they differ or they have special needs. How the aircraft is going to integrate with the other aircraft in your fleet. You may want to have a lot of commonalities. Also, you need to check what is the future redelivery conditions for that aircraft. This is a very important step because we have seen airlines that they have been asked to, let's say, return an aircraft that is kind of gold-plated when it's no need, but they have signed up for that in their lease. Also, you need to discuss and negotiate how maintenance reserves are going to work, how much, what the level of them, and also if you have power by the hour agreements that support, let's say, engines or components, how these are going to affect with the introduction of a new aircraft in your fleet, in your network. So these are some questions, and the technical department needs to be heavily involved. You need to understand that, of course, the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is how much is the lease rate. This is a negotiation between the airline, the operator, and the lessor, the lessee and the lessor. So beyond that rate, there are critical issues that the airline needs to check for the regulatory compliance, the record keeping on that aircraft, how it's going to be quickly integrated. They have to check, they are interested also how the aircraft is operational, available, what is the history of the aircraft, how many days has been down for various reasons, the reliability of the aircraft, and also the duration. At the same time, the interests of the lessor are quite different. Of course, they would like to receive their money on time, and that is very important for airlines and lessees to realize this. How to maintain the value of the asset, because that's what is extremely important for the lessor. The asset needs to be easily transferable and meeting all the requirements. And also if issues arise during the term of the lease, how these risks can be mitigated. So all these items need to be considered from both parties and how they're going to work on those. So, as I mentioned, one of the most important items is maintaining the value of the asset, the value of the aircraft. So an aircraft that it's brand new with no records, I'm afraid the value of that aircraft will be very, very, very low. Therefore, proper record keeping is extremely important for the aircraft in order to maintain the value. Of course, digitalization and systems that are becoming more and more available help a lot in these transactions, and they're very, as I mentioned, they can be extremely efficient. And of course, the physical condition of the aircraft is in many cases reflected in the records, but at the end you need to inspect visually and the status of the metal, of the asset, of the aircraft. So moving on, I'm just going to point out to some screenshots. A screenshot from our booklet that we have on best practices for aircraft leasing, and it's on the website that you can download. This is just a screenshot about the redelivery of the aircraft, and I'm sure my colleagues from IBA will get into more detail in explaining. And I would like to point out some of the challenges. There needs to be, I cannot, mention again and again the importance of the technical division, your engineering department, or external consultants if you don't have a strong function internally. But this is extremely important during the signing up of the contracts. during the delivery, and also during the redelivery, and of course during the period that the asset is leased, the aircraft is leased. So it's very important to understand how maintenance reserves are not only estimated, so that means how much you're going to pay, but also how maintenance reserves can be used. Like when do you apply for the money that you have paid for, and what paperwork is supporting documents are required. And finally, we consider that at least annual reviews with the lessor is a very good practice. So if you have a 10-year, 7-year lease, don't wait till the end of the term or 6 months, 3 months before the lease expires to get into it. So there is involvement in order to assess the status, and the technical input is a must. And when do you start preparing for the redelivery of the aircraft? Is when you get delivery of the aircraft. And my colleagues will go into more details. The link to our booklet on best practices is shown on the slide at the bottom. And also, I wanted to point out to a few other resources that we have. First of all, if a regulator tells you that electronic records are not accepted in this part of the world, please use this link there, because ICAO has already regulation that allows the use of electronic records and considers them equivalent to any type of paper record. So this is very important for you to know. There are standards that also have developed, but they are also being developed. And I point out to the ATA Business Spec 2500, and also ICAO is working on the cross-border transfer of aircraft for smooth transition between jurisdictions. Finally, a couple of other documents that we have. We have developed what we call an MRO Smart Hub with the link there. It is a place for airlines to get a web-based platform that they can exchange parts, and simplifies the whole issues. But at the same time, I think it's the first of its kind, as we are trying to build up a kind of a blue book for the value of aircraft parts. So based on actual transactions that airlines will provide us, we will provide what is the best or a fair market value that we call for a specific part in a specific condition. So this is something that we just started. As we have more and more airline participation, and not only airlines but from others, data participation, we envision that this will be coming kind of a pretty useful tool for the industry in parts transactions. And finally, one link for a document that deals with decommissioning of aircraft, part out of aircraft, as a lot of these parts will be coming back into the industry. And with this, I would like to thank you. And this is our website for more information. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris, for laying a very strong foundation for our discussion today on operating leases, the hidden costs and pitfalls to avoid, and what to do. I'd like to remind our audience that we are welcoming your questions to our speakers. You can submit them now, and at the end of the program, our speakers will respond to your questions. Now, let's go to our second pair of speakers, or actually, our second two speakers. Peter Walter, Director of Asset Management, IBA Group, and Guljar Lehri, Head of Aircraft Transactions and Technical Marketing, IBA Group. Peter and Guljar.
Well, Didi, thank you very much for the introduction, and Chris, thanks for your insight into IATA. This is Peter Walter speaking here. I just want to lead you through a little bit about who IBA are and some of the services we provide. We're a long-established, independent and multidisciplinary aviation consultancy. We're now at over 70 full-time employees, primarily based in Leatherhead, but we also have offices in Dublin and Tokyo. Most people know IBA as a valuer or aircraft appraiser, but the core services of the company actually go back way before that, and we have a large aviation technical consultancy and advisory business. So some of the products we have up there are airline maintenance reserve auditing, supporting aircraft in redeliveries, maintenance cost benchmarking. But what we're here today to talk about is obviously operating leasing. So in this slide, we're just looking at the attraction of aircraft leasing and why it works. The graphic there is supplied by Boeing, and you can see that the proportion of the green segment there represents the leased aircraft. And I don't know whether we'll actually get to a 50-50 position between leased and owned aircraft by 2020, but the growth in aircraft leasing is undeniable. The reasons for this are multiple. Perhaps the most significant one is you need less capital to actually lease an aircraft than you do to buy an aircraft, even if you buy it with the support of bank financing or debt. But equally, it gives you quick access to aircraft. If you place orders yourselves, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the long backlog, particularly at the moment with regards to the timescale between placing an order and when you actually receive delivery, but also access to latest technology, flexibility in your fleet plan in terms of building up, and of course avoiding residual value risk when you get to the end of the lease. So just looking at issues with regards to leasing, like most good things, too much of a good thing can be bad, but equally if you're not on top of managing leases, there can be some issues that arise. So aircraft are obviously hugely complex and extremely expensive bits of kit. So the owner of the aircraft, the lessor, is going to want to see that it's adequately maintained and monitored. So the lease has a lot of compliance that you need to go through. Equally, as you are going through the lease, you're utilising the maintenance, and therefore the maintenance and value utility, you have to pay maintenance reserves quite often. Larger, very strong credit entities and larger airlines tend to not require maintenance reserves, but managing these is a significant issue. And one of the services that IBA has provided for people is actually assisting you with the maintenance claim in respect of the work that is done and the paperwork that needs to be submitted to a lessor. And similarly with airworthiness directives, a lot of leases have cost-sharing mechanisms where above a certain benchmark, the lessee is entitled to claim from the lessor that cost sharing. So IBA has worked with a number of airlines doing an audit of their fleet, looking at the terms of their leases and the balances of their maintenance reserves, and an exercise that we did earlier this year, right back in January, revealed for one airline in excess of $5 million of unclaimed maintenance reserves. So it's a very vital aspect of how you deal with it, and it certainly exceeds the fees that we were charging for our services in that regard. So you obviously have to provide utilisation and monitoring, and that's just an ongoing aspect of advising the lessor of what's involved in and how much you're utilising their aircraft. So Guljar, I think you've got some points there as well.
Thank you, Peter. Guljar Lehri from IBA Group here. Just a few items that I would like to touch upon with regards to issues to be managed, predominantly lessor approvals for modification and upgrades during the term of the lease. Also, in regards to maintenance oversight and that is landing gear overhaul contracts, engine shop visit contracts, and component pooling contracts, which also can have a bearing on the life of exchange components that can be fitted to the airframe that could have a detrimental effect on the value if the age of the components that are being replaced are more than 110% rule of the life of the component.
Can you explain a little bit more about that, Guljar, in terms of what it means to say, if you're at a lease redelivery and say you've got a 10-year-old aircraft, what does the 110% actually mean?
So, basically, if you have a 10-year-old component, your airframe is 10 years old, you would need to have a replacement component or an exchange component within your pooling program, but the component cannot be more than 11 years old.
So 110% of the airframe life?
Correct.
Okay.
And that also can translate also into a cyclic and an hourly number as well.
Okay, so the same applies against time-controlled components?
Correct, yes. As well as we're looking at long-term commitment to aircraft and also the lease end redelivery management. And again, this is where we'd like to focus on the difficulty and challenging area, and this is where we'd like to really focus our discussion on.
Okay, thanks. You see the graphic there that's just popped up. Our estimate of aircraft redeliveries and the overspend is really quite significant. It averages around about $2 million in respect of a narrow body, and more than double that, 4.5 million when you get to looking at a wide body. And that overspend is in respect of maintenance that needs to be performed to comply with redelivery conditions that may not necessarily have been necessary had the aircraft been managed and the technical condition of the aircraft been managed with a view to the lease end a few years out. Several years ago, I was actually a lessor to an airline, and the engines that we received back were fresh out of shop, but the redelivery conditions only required half-life. So there was probably easily $4 to $5 million of unnecessary expenditure that airline had incurred. As a lessor, I was, of course, very happy. I was delighted to have brand new engines coming out, or fresh from shop engines coming out. So looking at lease ends and redeliveries, just to put this into some context in terms of how many we're talking about, you can see there, this is data that's come out from IBA's IQ system, which is a fleet management system. You can get aircraft valuations, but also an awful lot of information with regards to fleet data, and you can plot economic trends over your forecasts, etc. as well. But you'll see there, these are actual numbers of lease ends split by wide body and narrow body up until 2018. And then from 2019 onwards, this is a combination of lease ends that we already know about. And again, you can do searches within the IQ system for lease ends. It's lease ends that we know about, and also forecast lease ends based on average level length of lease from when the lease started. So we know when the leases started, and we can predict with a fair degree of accuracy when the leases will end. And you can see there, particularly on the narrowbody, a sharp increase between 2018 and 2019 in terms of redeliveries, averaging around about 500 to 600 in the narrowbodies and around about 100 to 150 in the wide bodies. It's less of a sharp uprise there. And so if you take that number that we had before on the overspend on lease end redeliveries, you can see that as an industry, 1.2 billion is a huge amount of wasted expenditure that's unnecessary going out the door. So if we can then move on to the next graph, this is split, similar data but split on a regional basis. and you can see that there is quite a significant focus in respect of Europe and the US, which would kind of make sense because that's where the majority of the fleets are. But Europe in the narrow bodies goes from 2018, it almost doubles to 2019 in terms of the lease ends, and we estimate around about 50% of these lease ends will result in an aircraft redelivery rather than a further extension. And in the US, that number triples. It's less pronounced in other regions, but it does still have a common feature, and we're seeing the same and similar with regards to wide bodies. So the issue is here, if you're in those regions, there is a significant increase in the demand for MRO and engine shop visits in order to get your aircraft into redelivery conditions. And one of the things that we have seen is that some leases are being extended because it's simply uneconomic for airlines to redeliver. They don't necessarily want that aircraft, but it's too expensive to actually redeliver it. So looking at the issues now with redeliveries, IBA over the last 3 years has conducted a survey where we've had over 200 respondents, roughly split between airlines and lessors, asking some specific questions as to around redeliveries and what they see. Now you can see here that the dark blue are the responses in 2000 and, hold on, let's get this right, 19. The green are 2018, the turquoise is 2016. And to note here is that one of the biggest issues was the underestimation of the effort and the time and the resource taken to actually redeliver an aircraft. Now the pleasing thing is clearly that has come down in terms of the number of respondents. You can see that it's reduced over the last 3 years. However, what is a concern is that the cause of late delivery being a lack of planning and late engagement is actually increasing. You'll see that about midway down. So lack of planning and engagement is that whilst people are more aware of it, actually they don't have the time or the resource to really act upon it. And you'll see the fourth bullet point there that airlines are actually just busy getting on with flying aircraft, and returning of aircraft is not necessarily something they do on a regular basis. One of the issues with IBA is that we do this on a regular basis. So although we're not an airline, we probably do more redeliveries than some airlines out there.
So going further on into that, Peter, we're looking at the issues around certification, unscheduled repairs, failed boroscopes as a key driver in causes of late redelivery, and reasons being with unscheduled repairs is maybe this incorrect certification. The repairs may not be permanent and obviously have to be removed during at lease end, and that hasn't really been communicated internally with the engineering focus within the airline, so they're not really informed of the return conditions. And also with regards to failed boroscopes, and what I mean by that is when you are doing a full front to back, it's a more restrictive boroscope that's normally done independently at the back end on the redelivery check, and if that fails, you are then into a situation where you're now going to have to induct an engine and have a delay, maybe 3 to 4 months with regards to inducting and carrying out repair. So these are a couple of the items that we have that are causing a delay with regards to redeliveries.
Okay, thank you. So if we can move on to the next slide. The challenges, we've focused on some of the areas, but now drilling down a little bit more, you can see by way of the issues that are caused. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about records, Guljar.
Yes. So again, with regards to the redelivery challenges that a lot of airlines face, and again, going back to my time when I was with TUI and redelivering aircraft, there are a lot of airlines have various forms of software and maintenance software for records keeping, and such as Trax and Ultraman and Oasis, and most commonly now Amos is quite prevalent in the marketplace with lots of airlines and MROs. And what seems to happen a lot of the time is the transition of that data from one system to another. If that data hasn't been cleansed and it's thoroughly audited, you can obviously that gives you issues when you're then producing your final reports, and also looking for the dirty fingerprints and record keeping that you would need during the term of the lease that you would need to build your redelivery Bibles for Lease End.
Okay. So looking at the table to the bottom right there, you can see that the challenges that people are expecting to cause problems for them is insufficient resource, both internally and externally, insufficient MRO support. We'll come on to that. We'll show you a slide in due course. But also, the third most populous issue is simply the number of increased aircraft that are going to be coming back off of lease. And so, again, we return to the graphic there with regards to the cost. And if you put that into context, that's equivalent to maybe 7 or 8 lease months. So you could actually just save yourself a huge amount of money, or even it's the cost of a heavy check, or the best part of and maybe even an engine overhaul. And the other thing I would say is that don't forget, if you don't engage properly with your lessor, as the demand for aircraft goes through a cycle, if the aircraft is an older aircraft type and the lessor is going to have challenges perhaps putting that aircraft out on lease again, he's not going to help you. He wants it to stay on lease for as long as he can. So there is an increased propensity for dispute and issues when we go into a downturn, when lessors don't want to have aircraft sitting on the ground. So there is even more reason why you need to be careful and approach this, and because lessors will become much more stringent. They don't want to see their aircraft sitting on the ground because they can't place it. They'd much rather have a late delivery from an airline.
Just wanted to pick on one more thing, Peter, and that is we also have seen a spike in our redelivery survey for 2019, and that is an increase in interiors, and that's down to lead times for soft furnishings, incorrect burn certification, or laminates and fire protection with regards to the return for an aircraft. So again, it does lead to problems. So be aware of what material you are using, and you have the correct certification for that material.
Okay, thank you. So we mentioned about MRO capacity, and you can see here, this is a graph going back up to 2013, looking at the number of aircraft redeliveries. It's actually focused just on narrow bodies, and again, this is data that comes out of IBA's IQ fleet platform. So what we've done here is something you can do in IQ. You can overlay it with this is the red line you can see there is oil price. The blue bars are the number of redeliveries up until 2018, and then forecast from 2019 onwards. So you can see there is an upward trend, And in 2008 to 2009, the oil price drops. That was obviously the GFC, which caused oil price to drop. It then resulted in order cancellations and extensions of existing kit. So you then see it in 2013, but you've got a different economic scenario. You don't have the same level of issues. What is causing the number of redeliveries to drop in 2016, 17, 18 is people are expecting new kit to come on board. And so what's actually happened is that the number of redeliveries has gone down through extensions, and that's been triggered by issues with entry into service and issues. This graph was actually plotted before the issue with the MAX, but we did have lots of engine issues with Trent and LEAP, etc. So existing technology got extended significantly. You can see the yellow blob there below the green trend line. That has simply been shifted along 2 years from 2016, 17, 18 to 2019, 20, 21. Now the problem that you're faced with there is that the MRO capacity has been used to dealing with around about 600 aircraft redeliveries per annum. All of a sudden that's jumped up to 1,200. There is simply insufficient MRO capacity. And then when you also focus on the issue that the MRO capacity is being helped to deal with OEM issues and correcting that, then think about how much technical resource is going to be required to get the MAX operational. You're really going to have to plan forward on redeliveries. Engage on your redeliveries. If you're expecting 12 to 15 months previously, now at least plan 2 years. So, going into a little bit more detail in terms of the cost-effective management of leases. Chris mentioned that understanding the lease and really getting involved, get a technical advisor in to help with when you first start the lease, and ensuring that throughout the terms of the lease, all departments within the airline are aware of what's going on. So engineering, maintenance planning, and the fleet planning department all need to be coordinated so that everyone understands it. And Guljar mentioned about modifications during the term of the lease and seeking lessor approvals. That's all well and good, but you do need to make sure that any such modifications are translated into your redelivery conditions. Otherwise, you're just going to be faced with the cost of having to undo it again. We spoke about AD cost shares and setting up an adequate maintenance reserve claims process. And as I said, we've helped airlines with that in the past.
Thank you, Peter. And I'd just like to reinforce that in regards to the effective setup. A lot of the times, the commercial teams within an airline would have already signed a lease, but you need to make sure that the engineering teams are involved so they understand the return conditions from the outset and are able to deliver that at the back end. We also are looking at making sure that your technical teams throughout the airline are aware of return conditions, including your supply chain and contracts, as well as building a relationship with the lessor during the term of the lease. I feel this is very important as to when the annual audits are being carried out and you're using that data that is being provided to the lessor to effectively manage the asset as you're going along during the term. This will free up those open item lists that vastly generate during the return condition check, which will obviously free up a lot of time and effort. We're also looking at pre-redelivery planning, and that is insurance boroscope prior to engine aircraft induction for a redelivery check, repair mapping, PMA parts, again, modification reversals. Do you need to do them, or do you get the buy-in from the lessor in writing and maybe a side letter to that effect? Again, going on, so we have just to reiterate, early engagement with the lessor and with the team for a page turning exercise is highly recommended.
Okay, thanks, Guljar. And so, looking at how to avoid some of these overspends, I think in summary, we'll be saying, I know we're a bit short on time, so pre-planning, engage early, have adequate resources for records. It's much easier if you are short on resource. It's much easier to get an external company in to come and address those issues and do an audit of what the requirements are in order to meet redelivery conditions, so that we can then start to address that. Have a strong project manager who is familiar with aircraft leasing and technical representation. Build relationships with the airline, between the airline and the lessor, as we've said. Have a good time well ahead to review the contract, understand the redelivery conditions, understand the status of the aircraft and the utilisation that's going to happen between that period and lease end, and have it pre-planned and MRO slots booked, shop visits if required, to meet redelivery conditions in good time. So plan your maintenance and be ready. So that's a very quick run through. We've tried to keep it short and sweet. And so if there are further questions, I'd just like to leave you here with a quick plug for IQ. We've mentioned it a couple of times. We have, in the last day, launched an airlines package for IQ. This is the proprietary data intelligence platform we have. There's a special airlines package with a very competitive preferential rate for airlines, and please do contact us if you'd like a free trial. And then lastly, I'd say, if there are issues around redeliveries, if we've sparked any thoughts that you'd like more information on, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We would really love to talk to you. And so if there are questions now, we'd be happy to answer some of them. Do you have any questions?
Hello. Well, thank you, Peter and Guljar, for your presentations. Very, very thorough, but it looks like a lot of our audience have questions for you today. Let's start with this one. Failed redelivery boroscope. Given that boroscope inspections performed on redelivery are not part of the aircraft maintenance program, does the engine OEM warranty cover defect rectification of any, and how? Who would like to take that question?
Hello everyone, this is Phil Seymour of IBA, and I've been monitoring the questions as they've come in to give Guljar and Peter a little bit of time to do the presentation. This could be a very complicated area because a lot of airlines subscribe or enroll engines into the manufacturer's programs. But usually this is where there is a big disconnect, because a lessor and the lease agreements will still generally require a full boroscope inspection at the end of the lease. And it's very difficult to get a lessor to give anything away on that, because it will want to be absolutely sure that there are no defects in the engine. So I think unless an OEM is prepared to stand by the engine when it's delivered to the next operator, then I think there may be a bit of an impasse in the industry on this one. So it is a very complicated issue, and of course, if you've got a 4-engined aircraft to redeliver, then it becomes twice the hassle of a narrow body. So it's a good question, but we've got several others. So that's about the best I can give to that one. So if you could fire away with the next question, that will be useful.
Sure. Can you advise the typical cost of managing an aircraft redelivery process?
Yeah, because of course we're giving you lots of information here, but the bottom line is what it's going to cost. There are a lot of variables here, such as age of the aircraft, whether the tech record system is electronic or in hard copy, whether the lease allows electronic copies to be redelivered, and also the airline organisation itself. We've spoken in general terms here quite a lot, but there are big differences between airlines. It could be a legacy style airline that has full in-house engineering and maintenance capability, or it may be an airline, maybe it's a low-cost carrier, and it outsources all of the maintenance and all the records management to the MRO and is heavily reliant on the MRO to redeliver the aircraft. And we do see this as a potential issue in the future. You've already seen how there's likely to be a considerable pressure on the MRO industry just in absolute numbers of redeliveries, but also does the MRO have the capability to look at the lease from a commercial perspective? Most MROs and most airlines are focused on airworthiness standards, quite rightly, maintenance programs that are approved by the regulators. It's only at these lease redelivery times when the dust is blown off the lease agreement, and very often that's too late. So I can't give you an exact answer, but I will give you a rough order of magnitude. Even if the redelivery fees were in the order of $100,000 to $150,000, there's, as you've seen from the graphic, there could be $2 or $4 million at stake. And as Peter has pointed out, we've always been able to manage, or rather save, well in excess of the direct fees. So I don't think any airline should be scared about engaging with a specialist outsourced provider of a service, because that is what we're doing day in, day out, as opposed to the airline staff who are really focused on day-to-day operations.
Thanks for that. Next question. Do you offer training to airline departments as to how best to handle their redelivery program?
Yeah, I think that's been the starting point of some of our engagement, because we've been very, very much used as facilitators to bring together the various airline departments, and we can speak to them about issues that there have been in the industry. There have been several high-profile legal disputes between airlines and lessors that have been heard in the commercial courts, and it really is it really is an eye-opener when you consider the amount of time and effort that can be engaged if a redelivery enters a litigation stage. We haven't included that in our costs of redelivery, but there have been cases that you could probably get through if you Google with redelivery disputes, and those will be costing airlines and lessors millions of dollars if they actually go to commercial courts or to mediation. So in terms of the training programs, it's definitely bespoke because, as I mentioned, the airlines can vary in terms of how they're organised, but sharing this information and doing a deep dive on how the specific lease needs to be managed is very important, because as we've seen here, the leases can vary considerably. We've seen some information recently where one low-cost carrier is dealing with 28 different lessors for its fleet. That is a huge effort on the airline's part.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to remind our audience that any questions we cannot answer in this session, you will be contacted directly with a response. We've got about a minute left here. Let's go with one more question. Are the MROs prepared for this transition to E-initiative?
I think that's a very simple answer. No, because I think I think the good things that Chris Markou was talking about earlier with the initiatives that we're looking at sort of beyond 2020. 2020 seemed a long time ago in 2015, but now we're only a few weeks away. So all of those initiatives and getting the OEMs on board, they are happening, but then you have to combine that with the MRO systems and the airline systems, and I think it will take decades until we get to that perfect solution.
Thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, our time is up today, and so we're going to have to close. I would remind our audience that any questions submitted that were not answered in this session, you will be contacted directly with a response. For now, I would like to thank our speakers today, Guljar Lehri, Head of Aircraft Transactions and Technical Marketing, IBA Group, Peter Walter, Director of Asset Management, IBA Group, and Chris Markou, Head Operational Coast Management, IATA. I'd like to remind you that our presentation will be available on demand within a few days. Well, that's it for us today. I'm Dee Dee Doak for Airlines Magazine, IATA, and our sponsor, IBA. Goodbye from London.